Hi everyone, it's Sunday lunchtime, so it's time to look at another classic rock album. Today I'm reviewing the 1971 Who's Next album by the legendary band The Who. Now, it was their fifth album following My Generation in 65, a quick one in 66, The Who Sell Out in 67, and The Mesmeric Tommy in 69. It was also an album that was sandwiched between those great rock operas penned by Townsend. As I said, Tommy was in 69 and Quadrophenia was in 73, and indeed this album, Who's Next, was originally destined to be another rock opera, but more of that later. So the band makeup had been settled since the start, with the uncompromising Roger Daltrey on those lead vocals, multi-talented Pete Townsend on guitars, synths, pianos and vocals. One of the greatest bass players indeed of all time, John Entwistle on bass and occasional vocals, and the eccentric Keith Moon on drums and percussion. And man, just to mention those cats' names, it just sends shivers down my spine. Some guest musicians on this one were Dave Arbus, who played a mesmeric violin on Barbara O'Reilly, and the legendary Nicky Hopkins, who had a piano on The Song Is Over and Getting in Tune. Now, getting the plaudits out of the way immediately, it was platinum in the UK and 3 times platinum in the US, with over 3 million sales. No mean feat. And in 2003, Rolling Stone magazine ranked it as 28th in its 500 greatest albums of all time. It had slipped to 77th position by 2020 ranking, but hey, it was number 15 on Pitchfork Media's 100 top albums of the 70s. In 2006, Time magazine included it as one of the 100 greatest albums of all time. In 2007, it was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame, and also in 2007 voted number 49 in the 3rd edition of all-time top 1,000 albums. Man, that's really some kind of pedigree. Looking at the specifics, it was released on the 14th of August 1971 on the newly created Track Records, essentially owned by Kit Lambert and Chris Stamp, the management of The Who, and distributed by Decca Records. In a little over a decade from its formation in 1966, Track had become associated with some really influential acts that included Jimi Hendrix, Arthur Brown, John and Yoko, Golden Earring and Fairport Convention, to name just a few. And the band produced the album themselves, with the respected sound engineer Glyn Johns credited as associate producer. Townsend commented that we were just getting astounded at the sounds Glyn was producing. It was recorded between April and June of 1971, with early recordings being created at Mick Jagger's Stargrove studio at his house, with the backing track of Won't Get Fooled Again there, before moving on to Olympic Studios in London, where Bargain was the first to be recorded in April, before the main content was laid down in the May of that year. The John Entwistle composition, My Wife, was really quite a late addition to the album, after originally being identified for a solo project he was working on. It should be mentioned that Pete Townsend used the early sounds that synthesizers were able to create to great effect on this album, was able to modify those keyboard sounds into many individual styles that so many bands had not quite embraced or mastered at that point. Johns was also responsible for modifying the sound of Keith Moon's drumming to be less flamboyant and more functional by implementing his down-to-earth style. The artwork for this album is really highly interesting. The photography was by an American artist called Ethan Russell, and he's credited as the only photographer, author and video director to have shot album cover photography for the Beatles, the Rolling Stones and The Who. That's some achievement, that. The cover picture was taken in the north of England, roughly around the Sheffield area, and pictured the band having made apparent use of an unscheduled comfort stop and relieved themselves on a rock that was there in a disused slag heap. Whilst this is an instantly recognisable front cover, the truth is rumoured that it was only In fact, peat that had actually needed a pee, with the rest being rainwater for the others that had been collected in a nearby canister and added for effect. On the subject of adding, it's said that the intensity of the sky was added later by art director John Koch to get a more dramatic effect. You should look out the window today and have a perfect backdrop. The album tracklist is as follows. On side 1, it consisted of Baba O'Reilly, Bargain, Love Ain't For Keeping, My Wife, and The Song Is Over. Side 2 is Getting in Tune, Going Mobile, Behind Blue Eyes, and Won't Get Fooled Again. 3 singles were released from the album. First off was the closing track, Won't Get Fooled Again, and this is an absolute pearl of a song and one of my favourite tracks of all time. It was originally written to be part of that other rock opera that I was talking to you about earlier that Townsend was planning, and it was initially going to be called Lifehouse, but this was abandoned. But essentially the songs that he'd written were used without there being perhaps, a linking theme to it. An absolute classic of a rock track that utilised Townsend's experimentations with synthesizers from the time that just made that difference. It's a track that really is a mainstay of classic rock stations to this very day. And if you haven't heard it, I do recommend you do straight away and ask the question, just where the heck have you been? It made a high of 7 in Canada, 9 in the UK, 15 in the US. But numbers don't really count for this track. It's just pure classic rock. Man, the second single was the amazing Baba O'Reilly, or Teenage Wasteland as some refer to it. It's an anthem for all and was inspired by the aftermath from their 1969 appearance at the Isle of Wight Festival, where after the gig Townsend looked at the destruction made by the fans and declared that it was a teenage wasteland to sum the situation up. Dedicated to spiritual masters Meher Baba and also US composer Terry Riley, who had such an influence on Pete at the time. Released as a single in Europe but not US or UK, strangely, it made little chart impact, but was another to be played on rock radio around the world. Now, Behind Blue Eyes was the last single, and thinking back to Townsend's aborted rock opera, this was sung from the perspective of the villain in that opera that never was, and stems back to Pete being tempted by a groupie who he managed to ignore. Back in his room, wrote some of his feelings that became part of this song. It was released in France, Belgium, the States and Canada. Again, it had limited success. Townsend had considered it unsuitable to be released in the UK, claiming that it was too out of character. Bargain is a love song dedicated to the love of God specifically, rather than perhaps a woman. He sings that he would gladly give up everything for God and was influenced by Meher Baba in this song and how his feelings were added to music. A great track, but sounds quite similar to Won't Get Fooled, in my opinion. Love Ain't For Keeping was next, and it's a short, sharp track that's blues-tinged love song and references physical love being in the moment, to share love rather than keep it. I'm all for that. My Wife is John Entwistle's contribution to the album, and what a contribution. Written and sung by John, he also plays piano, as well as the brass instruments. He wrote those lyrics after having a big argument with his wife one night. Side 1 closer is The Song Is Over, quite typically, and thinking back to the abandoned rock opera again, this was a song that would have taken place after the theatre the band were playing at, called the Lifehouse, had been raided by the police, with the crowd rushing to leave. Rolling Stone had described this track as an utterly beautiful song, in which Townsend sings exquisitely over a gentle piano background before and in between Daltrey charging in with exhilarating over a hard part with breathtaking chord changes in the manner of Listening to You, I Hear the Music, refrain from Tommy. So Getting in Tune opens side 2 and is a masterful account of the contradictions between being a rock star and achieving inner peace. Townsend seemed to be having enormous difficulty at this time in his life with this yin and yang of existence, and was not helped by seeking enlightenment from Baba. It's beautifully sung by Daltrey and some excellent piano from Nicky Hopkins on piano at this point. AllMusic critic Tom McGuinness praised the song's arrangement as brilliant and praises the band's mastery of dynamics, tension and release techniques coalescing seamlessly with strong, memorable melodies. I'll second that. Going Mobile signals the last of the tracks we are looking at. Daltrey excused himself for this one, so left to Pete, John and Keith to create a quite beautiful song, extolling the virtues of having a mobile home, allowing one to essentially lay their hat exactly wherever they want. It was quite a fun track, full of vim and vigours, as Townsend sings all of the things that you can do in a mobile home. And owning a motorhome myself, I can relate to many of these lyrics very much indeed. So my thoughts on this album after spending 45 minutes or so in its company are as follows. It's an album that is full of the Who at its best. Is it their best album? I don't really know, as I've not heard the full discography, but a number of critics seem to think it is. The tracks are very strong, and it's difficult really to name a weak track. If I'm pushed for one, then it's possibly John Entwistle's song My Wife. I'm sorry, John, but I was pushed into making that decision. I like Baba and Won't Get Fooled and Going Mobile. Would I recommend you buying this album? Most definitely. It's classic rock 101 and a very enjoyable listen indeed. So thanks for watching my review of Who's Next, and if you have any comments, then leave them below. Your opinions really are very greatly valued.